everybody. This is July 27th. It's the meeting number 10 of the Open Source Malaria Consortium, and we're here today to talk about a few of the recent results of the group, of what's been made recently, and to deal with one of the main issues that we've got with this series, which is metabolic stability, metabolic liability. So the meeting is recorded. It's going to be put on YouTube. On the right there's a bunch of discussion notes with some links to primary data. There is a slide deck which I'll share now. If anyone wants to talk, please just alert me to that, and I can switch on microphones. Okay, so I'm just going to switch over to the this thing. Hopefully this works. And I just want to make sure that we do this right. So this is, I can probably switch over, I think, to this deck here. Hopefully everyone can see that, and that's pretty clear. One moment, I'll just arrange one thing. And here. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to just share this this thing full screen, hopefully, or maybe that's clear enough. So hopefully that's okay. Alice, if you're on chat, Gmail chat, could you just quickly give me a message if anything's wrong or if anything needs my attention? Because when I share my screen like this, I can't see the chat window, but I can see a chat window with you on Google if you can do that. Just in case I'm talking and people can't hear me or there's some problem. Okay, so here's the deck, and so I guess the first thing I'd like to do is just run through some of the most recent potency data, just to get everyone up to speed. Hopefully everyone can see this. If not, please just give me a shout. So there were several rounds of potency evaluation on Series 4, which is the series we're going to talk about today, and I guess the oldest were this set of compounds made by Joe and Tom as part of their honors theses, and there are a bunch of molecules here with not necessarily the most desirable log p predicted log p values, but some of these compounds were potent and some were not. And I think we learned a little bit about what's needed for some of the activity for these molecules. At the time this work was being done, we had some work done on an aldehyde oxidase assay by Pfizer, which suggested that some of the amide series, so OSMS 201 over here and 206, 202, these amide compounds were a little bit less desirable than the ether-based compounds, so 187, 189, and 208, because some of the amides were a little bit more, tended to be better substrates for aldehyde oxidase. And so as a result of that, we slightly deprioritized the amide series, and we've been looking since then more at the ethers. There were a few other compounds that were being made at that time, and so were tested, as well as some other compounds in the ether series. And again, we weren't really able to break through in some of these sets beyond about 200 nanomolar potencies. Even though some of the compounds had decent C log Ps of around 3 here, we weren't really able to get beyond those kind of potency levels. And several of the compounds we made in an attempt to make more soluble compounds there down the bottom there with pyridines in the northeast position weren't potent at all, which was unfortunate. So some of the early attempts we made to try and improve solubility, they weren't really successful in terms of potency of compounds. Then as this work was going on, there was some work being done by Patrick Thompson and his students in Edinburgh, trying to make the pyridine analogs of the pyrazines. So up in the top right, there was a known compound, OSMS 189, with decent potency, and in the 3 molecules that were made, which were pyridine analogs, were found to be not particularly potent. So it seemed as though we needed the pyrazine structure, which was a negative again, but useful to know. And then most recently, we had a go at defining some compounds, 10 compounds, and eight of them were made, 10 compounds which had much better predicted solubilities, and which explored the structure a bit more boldly, I guess. So we had cyclohexyl replacements for the aromatic rings, which kind of deplanarize the molecule and reduce the number of aromatic structure components in the structure. We tried a substituted pyridine in OSM S278 up there, and polar groups down here that we were kind of reinvestigating based on some data we inherited at the start of the project. So many of these compounds were not potent at all, were not active, but still, useful negatives, I guess. Disappointing that I guess some of these compounds which are predicted to be more soluble than most were not potent. But still, those are the data that were obtained. So I think as a result of many of these data, we were still of the opinion that essentially we need some kind of aromatic ring in the northwest. We were making these as basic phenols just because that made the chemistry simpler, but many of the data we inherited had fluorines in this ring, which gave good potencies. But then we were still trying to explore a little bit more what we might be able to get away with in the northeast, so the group attached to the triazole. Now we'll come back to what we're going to do with these data in terms of predicting, the next set that we should make based on these data. And Willem's here, who's done some work on that, and Alice has some thoughts on this too. But we did, I guess, have a consultation about which analogs we were going to make. But I guess I wanted to make sure that we were also including what we knew of the metabolic liabilities of some of these molecules in that process. So rather than going straight into thinking about what to make next, I thought the next thing we should do is just basically review what we know of how these compounds are cleared and what rates they're cleared at, if that's okay. So I wanted just to quickly move on to what we know of some of the liabilities of these molecules, and then we'll come back to thinking about analogs. So on the wiki for the project, there's everything we know about the metabolic clearance of these molecules, and I've summarized some of these things in a recent post on the OSM blog. And I guess I just wanted to work through some of these things now. And here's the main slide, I guess, with the greatest density of data. So 3 molecules were examined last year for metabolic ID purposes. So fragments were identified and modifications were identified to the molecules as a result of their metabolic clearance. And it was the data are shown in the bottom of this slide here, which summarizes a bunch of data that we received from Sue Charman's lab. The 3 molecules which were examined in those assays had been the subject of an in silico prediction by Chris Swain, who's with us today. And those data are shown on the top, where the red positions are the positions that were predicted to be hotspots. The data that were then obtained, just the clearance data, are shown underneath those structures. So the Clint and the T-half values are shown in as much as we have them. And these are the 3 that I guess have had most work done on them. Now the conclusions from that were kind of as expected, in the sense that it was found that some of the benzylic positions were liabilities. So in the middle compound here, this 5-membered ring with the nitrogen in it was subject to oxidation. The extended aromatic system in the green circles was subjected to an oxygenation at some point, somewhere on that structure. We don't know if it's the triazole pyrazine ring or the attached aromatic ring. And that some of these molecules were fragmenting. So the aromatic component in the northwest was sometimes coming off. But we don't know the site of the oxidation, so we don't know what it is that is the issue. That's the first thing to say. So we know that it's being oxidized, but we don't know where. That's the first thing to say. The values, obviously, that we're seeing of the clearance times, the half-life and the clearance rates, are suboptimal in the sense that we would need to improve these numbers considerably for us to consider having a a lay lead. So just to go over a few more data points before I open it up for comments here, and I'd like to just to get David Shackleford's comments on some of these data, but there's 3 more slides I just want to quickly run through before we do that. I guess what's striking about some of the inherited data. So we also have clearance data on other compounds, but basic microsomal stability assays and so on. For which we don't have MedID work, but we have clearance data. And what's striking about some of these things is that the use of blocking groups. So here a comparison of an O-methyl with an O-CHF2 doesn't really, based on the data we have, do much to improve the metabolic data. And if you look at other data that we have, and this is all on the wiki, so I'm just cherry picking data from the wiki. If you look at other data here, these are 5 examples of compounds that have been examined, and these are all, again, all on the wiki. One might think, looking at this middle compound, 67936, that the big liability for this compound is going to be this, perhaps would be this benzylic position here, where there are 2 H. But the data that we received, and this is Monash data, aren't particularly better than an analogous compound where a blocking group is there. And just by browsing some of this data, I get the feeling that maybe the worry we have of the benzylic position, maybe it's justified, but maybe blocking that isn't really making a lot of difference to the parameters, to the data that we're seeing. In other words, doing the obvious thing of blocking the benzylic position isn't really getting us over the line of improving these clearance times as much as we'd like. That was my first thought. And so, looking at, this is the last slide I'm going to put of data, and then I'll open it up for comment. This is some more data. Again, the green that you're seeing, hopefully you can see green. These are the data from Monash. And we're not really seeing huge differences for these data, but based on whether or not we have this sort of benzylic position block, which is making me think that maybe the problem is somewhere else. But I'm not sure if that's the conclusion I take from this. We have the aldehyde oxidase data, which suggests that several of these compounds from the ether series, so the kinds of molecules that are on the screen at the moment, are not substrates for AO, which implies to me that we don't necessarily have to worry about the triazole pyrazine ring being oxidized. And as far as I could tell from Chris Swain's original in silico analysis, we're not necessarily worried about the ring being a liability for CYP-related processes. So I guess I'm not particularly worried about the triazole pyrazine ring. I guess I'm more worried about the side chains and trying to spot something which may be a problematic motif, but I can't see what it is. So I guess Paul Willis and I were talking about this recently, and the suggestion was that maybe trying to install blocking groups isn't really the way to go, and that maybe we need to be dealing with sort of gross details of the compound, so improving log D. All right, so what I'll do now, I think that Alice just wanted me to enable her microphone. I've just got to try and work out. Okay, I just want to make sure that I can just enable people's mics. So I'm just going to quickly switch that off and allow people to. I just have to do this so I can enable people's microphone and then coordinate what people are saying. If you want me to switch back to the slides, I can try and do that. But if anyone would like to comment on the data I just presented, please do. Would you like to say something about the data there, David? I mean, first thoughts about what the data is saying to you?
Can you hear me there now?
Yeah, if you could just try and speak loudly if you can, but, so people can hear you.
Okay, I'll try and speak up. Matt, can you go back to the first slide that you put up, where we had done the more in-depth metabolic pathway character?
Yes, I can. So, so the first, you mean the MedID stuff, yeah? So this slide.
That's it. One of the things that's really standing out for me is the fact that we did observe the OD alkylation, so the cleavage in it, the ether.
Yep.
So that for me is immediately, if that ether group is going to be a feature of the scaffold, then we should be looking to see whether that is responsible for a significant proportion of the overall metabolism. Because we may find that that's your primary loss of compound in a microsomal test system, is just through cleavage there. Now, in the studies that we ran, we have no way of assigning relative contributions of the OD alkylation pathway and the monooxygenation pathway of that molecule. It's relatively easy to access that information if we have the two fragments. So if we had, and presumably you've got it as a synthetic precursor, the product that corresponds to the monooxygenation, and if you had the other end of the molecule available as authentic standards, you could look at formation of those two essentially metabolites in the microsomal test system and do a mass balance type assessment.
So do you mean, just to clarify, so in the case of the molecule on the bottom left, so 669844, the two fragments that are indicated by this cleavage of the blue bond here, is that what you meant? So this half and this half?
Yes.
And that if we provided those two fragments, that would reveal something about the way in which those molecules are being processed?
Yeah. So what we could do there is if we incubated 669844 and looked at formation of, or the molar formation of the group that is indicated by the big green squiggle, the monooxygenation product, then you wouldn't have the monooxygenation product, would you? You would have the non-monooxygenated form of that group.
That's right.
So if you could provide us that non-monooxygenated form, then we could have a look at the OD alkylation of the intact parent compound.
Okay. Okay.
So what could be occurring is that the first metabolic hotspot could be the ether, and then that green bubble is subject to a monooxygenation once we've had the cleavage.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting.
That the monooxygenated fragment could also be a secondary metabolite.
Okay. If that is an obvious problem, is there, if you imagine installing, so next to the oxygen in the parent molecule, so next to the ether oxygen in the parent molecule, is installation of a methyl group, next to that oxygen on the CH2. Is that the kind of thing that might effectively block that?
I was about to suggest exactly that. I think that's the way you could access the same sort of thing structurally.
Okay.
Try and block that.
Because that is that's an analog type that's been suggested, and we have very little data on what happens when you substitute that CH2 next to the ether oxygen.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on that?
I mean, it's Paul Willis here. I wonder if what we also need to look at is the correlation between the in vitro and the in vivo, because you know, those figures there, they're not too bad in terms of, you know, intrinsic clearances for an LO compound. But my recollection is that when we'd taken compounds like that in vivo, then the clearance that you saw was higher than you would predict from that in vitro. So I'm just a bit wary about us putting huge amounts of work into understanding an in vitro system if that isn't actually predictive of the in vivo. So do we need to look at the bigger picture a bit, actually find out whether in vitro is predictive of in vivo, and only in that case is it really worth going down a huge in vitro MET-ID pathway? What are your thoughts there, David?
I think it's a really good suggestion. I don't know how far we've gone in this project, and I'm relatively new to this group. I don't know how far we've gone in terms of establishing an IVIVC. I mean, my ideal approach to that is to take a compound that's got the lowest metabolic stability or the highest metabolic stability in the in vitro test system, and something that's, even though it'll never work, it's got a very high intrinsic clearance, but we put that in vivo just to see that that bears out. So something low, something high, and something intermediate between those two extremes. Do we have any data along those lines?
I don't think we've got an IVIBC, no. I think we haven't done that. I think it would be very simple to get 3 compounds with a range of values and try that.
I guess the question is, do we have a compound?
Well, we do have some IV data, so.
Yeah, I can forward the data,
so
David.
I think it's the first step.
Sorry, carry on, Paul.
I was going to say, I think the first step, we do have some PK data, which I think has been generated at Monash and other places. So the first step is probably to share that with David and see. He can then compare what we saw in vivo with the in vitro, and then we can look for any gaps and then potentially fill them with another few dosing slots.
Yeah, so I'll send you the link, David, for all the data we have that's on the wiki. All of the PK data we have is there. A lot of that was inherited, and I'm not sure it correlates with the same compounds that we have a lot of data for in vitro. That's all. But I'll forward you the link so that you can see it. It's all summarized there. So I'll do that after this meeting.
That'd be great.
There was so we do also have on the 8 compounds that for which we have the most data. There is also, now that we have this Google Sheet of values, there is also log D data, so measured solubility data, 2 different pHs for 8 compounds for which we have clearance data. And I extracted the data from the main sheet to see if there was a trend, so plotting log D versus log clearance, and I don't see anything yet. But I put up an action item on GitHub with a link to the relevant data. So there's 8 data points to see if anyone can spot anything that will give us a clue, just in terms of any correlation between those 2 things. So if anyone has any bright ideas, that would be very helpful. Obviously, we're aiming for improving the log D of these compounds, and something I haven't yet done is to plot the measured value versus the predicted log P values, but just to see if there's a correlation there. But certainly, we're aiming to try to reduce the log D. So if anyone has any bright ideas, that'd be great. If anyone wants to interrogate the data a little bit. Did anybody want to? Yeah, please go ahead.
The log D versus clearance, I'd also be interested to look at the log D versus volume of distribution.
Sorry, could you are you able to speak up just a little bit?
Yep. In addition to the log D versus clearance, I would be keen to scrutinise the log D versus volume of distribution. Recognising that clearance is going to have an impact on oral bioavailability, but volume of distribution is also going to have a potentially significant impact on half-life.
Yeah. Okay. So this, you mean this is a measured value? So you're talking about obtaining a measurement on those same 8 compounds?
I think that for any compound where we have in vivo PK, particularly after IV administration, we should be looking at both clearance and volume of distribution within the context of the phys-chem parameters.
Right.
And okay. Those parameters, whether they're experimentally measured or in silico predictions, I wouldn't be fussed at this point.
Okay.
I think along those similar lines, coming back to, I think it was Paul's point, I'd like to see whether any experimental phys-chem parameters are correlating with the calculated values.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that.
We could save ourselves an awful lot of effort if the in silico predictions are valid.
Okay. Okay, let me so if the just because we're half past, I was going to move on to another couple of items now, if that's all right. Just to carry on going through the deck here. Hopefully that's okay. Back to sharing the screen again. Just wanted to check the chat window. Just to note, one of the things we were thinking about, and which was mentioned at last year's ESEC committee, was this imidazole analog of the triazole. So the modification of the ring structure had been looked at, and these are inherited data. With one of the imidazole isomers giving extremely high clearance rates, and the other giving not great rates, but certainly not as bad as the other isomer. So the middle isomer here with the nitrogen at the bottom of the structure wasn't too bad. We have an exchange student working with OSM in the lab here at Sydney, Tian Yi, who was looking a little bit at maybe making this ring system again. The chemistry is actually to try to make a ring system like this and then install the side chains late stage. But as part of that project, he might be able to make a compound like this one here, 669-846, with something in this position where there's the CH, so maybe C-methyl or C-phenyl or something, just to see if those compounds are active. That position has not been investigated on the ring up till now. So this is the only change in that position so far. But if we were able to put something in that group, we might have something with reasonable expectation of a decent, he says naively, a decent clearance rate. So he's going to be looking at some of that chemistry to see if we can access some of those compounds. That's just going on right now. So it's a synthetic chemistry project which would have that nice outcome. The ability for us to modify the pyrazine ring is fairly limited. There were, again, inherited data for these compounds. So mainly these first 4 had groups installed on the ring, and all were not potent. The N-oxide was found not to be potent. And of course, as we just saw, the Edinburgh compounds, the pyridine analogs, were found to be not potent. The only position which hasn't been investigated in any detail is the compound with something in this kind of northwest position here next to the nitrogen. I forget which number on the ring system that is, but adjacent to the ether. So no one's really put anything in that position yet. That's something which we could think about for the future, but it hasn't been looked at yet. Okay, so with all of that said, we have in recent weeks thought about which analogs we might want to make. I'll just quickly run through this, and then I was going to hand it over to Willem to talk a little bit about the work that he's been doing on analog prediction. So the compounds that have already been suggested, which are being made, are these three shown here: A, B, and C. I wonder if Alice, if you wanted to talk about this and then the next couple of slides, is that all right? I'll just come out here and I just have to quickly enable your audio. I think I don't think that's on yet. Hang on a minute. Alice, you should be able to speak now. Are you able to? I can't hear you if you've you need to enable your microphone at the top if you haven't done that already. Just waiting. I think Alice is currently indisposed with a technical problem. Let me just quickly go back in the slides to make sure that we are moving along. Alice, when you're ready, you can jump in. Your microphone's enabled. So the three compounds shown here are the ones that are kind of residual. Alice is currently making A. B is a compound we were getting quotes for from CROs, and C is a compound that we were just interested to look at because we retained this O-methoxy, but we lacked the aromatic ring. These are sort of still in process, and other compounds that we were looking at, which sort of combine several of the nice things that we've been seeing in other analogs. So compound E down here has a nice log p-value. And combines pretty much everything that we would expect of an active compound, just to make sure that when we combine features, we see a decent potency. And yet we're below 3, which was our kind of cutoff for C log p. So these are still in process to some extent. And then most recently, we had some work done by Sydney Grammar School and some of our own undergraduates here who have been making a few compounds to kind of add to the library of things that are being looked at. Again, these have been made and are being purified and will be added to the sort of the list of things. These ones shown on the screen are not abiding by what we need for the log p values, but they've been made because they could be made, and some of the precursors from Sydney in terms of allowing other people to attach other alcohols and other groups to the structures. So these are sort of violations of our rule. But in the meantime, Willem has been looking at the existing data that we had, and has been working on predicting some next generation compounds that maybe we should be looking at. So what I need to do is just quickly nip out of here and switch on your microphone, Willem. Willem, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrongly. If you enable your microphone at the top of the screen, you should be able to talk to us now.
Okay, I think I've just done that.
Yes, hi, I can hear you. I'll go back to the slides if that's useful.
Yeah. Oh, you already put my slides in. I see.
Yeah, I did. So if you were able to give us a brief overview of the things you'll be doing, that would be very interesting.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But this is just a title slide. So if you go to the next one. Yeah. So just where did I come from? So I work for a small startup company, and we develop algorithms to automate medicinal chemistry design. So not the chemistry, but the what to make next stage. And our typical customer is a pharmaceutical company. But then Jeremy saw that the tweet which said which compound should be synthesized next. So that got me interested, and I quickly tried to come up with some suggestions. So the easy thing I could do is on the next slide. We're all about building models. So I just quickly built a Bayesian naive Bayesian potency model. Basically, on this slide, it is shown it is predictive, but it is not brilliant. And that this is using the data as what's available. I think I did this in June. And the right is the rock plot, and you typically look under the area under the curve. And there is a little number here between 0 and 1, and you want this to be as close to 1 as possible, and it is 0.7 something, which means it is predictive, but not brilliantly so. But if you look at the enrichment plot on the left, this is the performance of the model when it has a high score, and that is pretty decent. After that, here it's more or less random, but this just shows you that if you have a high model score, it's probably okay. So it's not very good at distinguishing moderately active from totally inactive compounds. Okay, so if you go to the next slide, this is basically, okay, so how do we come up, one easy way to come up with new things to make is to look what you have already made. So these are the two core structures present, well, we discussed earlier this teleconference. And if you just take all the compounds and basically use these core structures to chop them in bits, so you get all the R groups where we shown here. And then there were 96 different ones used in the R1 position and 19 different ones in the R2 position. And now you can enumerate all different combinations of core, R1 and R2, and that's on the next slide. So we have 2 cores and then 19 R1 and 96 R2. So there are about 3,500 possible compounds you can make with the building blocks you have already used. Well, when I reran it, I think last week, 119 were already, I mean, you enumerate the compounds you start with as well. So 119 are already known. On the blog there were some proposals, but there were no smiles, and basically I had no time to redraw the structures. But there were inches, so I matched by inchy, and I could suggestion E and O happened to be in this set as well. And someone had put 12 suggestions on the same blog, but then with smiles. So I just added those to the mix as well. So I have the virtual library of 3,500 plus those 12 structures. And then I went with some iterative design on the blog, which is a very new experience for me to do this in the open like this. So I started with a log p, because that's the log p calculator I have, of 3.5, but then very few compounds we made. It was pointed out to me that the amide linker was probably not a good idea. So this filters down the 3,500 to a smaller number. But then you have to pick. Yeah, and basically there are 2 choices. You can just do a full exploitation. Yeah, so basically sort them by predictive model score and make the highest scoring ones. And if you want to make 5, you can make the 5 highest highest scoring ones. Or if you want to make 10, yeah, you just go down the list. So this is the highest probability of finding an active, but they will be the closest possible to your known actives. Yeah, so there's to some extent no surprises there. Yeah, structurally. you can take a more explorative approach where you look like, well, I have, for instance, this particular R1 I've used 10 times, and this other R1 I've only used 1 time. I should make more of the analogs with the R1 substituent, which I haven't used so often. Yeah, because if you have only made 1 and it is active, is that's statistically relevant, significant? And the same, like if you have only made it once and it is inactive, how sure are you that the inactivity is caused by that R1? So I analyzed the chemical space a bit. What are the undersampled bits of the chemical space where you should actually make more compounds to know for sure if you whether there's activity or not in that part of chemical space. So basically, I delivered 2 designs: an exploitative one and an explorative one, and it's basically up to the people running the project to decide, well, what is the most current pressing issue. If you think, this is the one of the things that fell out of this is that all the explorative design ones used the ring system with the 3 nitrogens. It's, because most of the compounds made so far were the ring system with the 4 nitrogens. And that is, yeah, the one with 3 nitrogens was underexplored. If you're sure that you can find a good compound in the ring system with the 4 nitrogens, then you shouldn't also start to investigate the other one. But the danger you run then is that suppose you run into a metabolic issue or a hERG issue and there is no way to get out of there, since you have put all your resources into one series, you basically have painted yourself in a corner. So it's more like a strategy discussion. Do we try to keep 2 series alive at the same time for as long as possible, or are we at the stage that you can say, well, I'm confident that this series is better than the other series. Let's put all the resources in the better series, and that is something a computer cannot tell you. That's something you have to decide amongst ourselves. So that's basically exploitation versus exploration. On the next slide. Yeah, so so far I was fully interpolating, so only using building blocks seen before, and this was a quick way to get some novelty in. So we had analyzed Campbell. What are the molecular pairs in there? So match molecular pair is just 2 molecules which differ by 1 R group. That is the most easy way of explaining. And if you have that, if you have 2 molecules that just differ by 1 R group, so one is a chlorine, the other is a bromine. Yeah, very trivial example. That describes a transformation. Like you can change a chlorine into a bromine, and that transformation you can apply to other substrates as well. So basically, we got thousands of these kind of molecular pair transformations, applied them to the R groups I had derived earlier. I used that to enumerate new compounds, which brings some novelty in. Once you do that, you get a lot of undesirable R groups. You can get things like pentavalent carbons. So we applied lots of filters. Yeah, so the ones we did before, the amide and the A-log-P, but we limited the change to, I only want to see R groups where at maximum 4 atoms have changed compared to the previous one, the substrate, the paints, and a lot of other structural alert filters. We don't want to make 7-membered rings. There is a thing called QED, it's a kind of attractiveness metric. We want that to be greater than 5. Well, we applied lots and lots and lots and lots of filters, and again I came up with an exploitation model set using the Bayesian model and an exploration set. The exploitation will not, as before, will not be too far away from what we've seen before, because otherwise, yeah, the model will quickly be outside its applicability domain. So even if something is very good, it can't predict it. So that will be fairly close in. So the conclusion is the multiple designs. I've only used the column p-file ET50. So since then more data has been added. So especially more activity data. So I should be able to build a better activity model. Especially, I think these compounds originally came from that, was it the Twascantos GSK set or another? I mean, there must be more HTS, high throughput data from the past as well. That this is a note. I implemented everything in Pipeline Pilot, which is not open source. I don't know if that is an issue actually. But I can rerun this fairly quickly. Yes, if new data becomes available, I can rerun this straight away. Then I have one more slide, but that's more about data, I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's very useful. Thank you. Yes, we should rerun this analysis because the Google sheet with all the data is much more comprehensive now.
Yeah.
We need to limit it to series 4, which is the series we're discussing right now. Some of the data in the spreadsheet is other series which are not related and which are based on the GSK set.
I mean, sometimes you can have a good crossover of series. So if you build a model using all the data, I mean, in the end, you expect to lead to one pharmacophore. Yeah, so one binding site.
Right.
So what is a good side group, good R group in one series might also be a good R group in another series.
Okay. We've had a bunch of data input from students as part of the sort of crowdsourcing push on the spreadsheet. So I think what we'll do is after this meeting, we'll just reconnect a little bit and try to make sure that the data are being, all the relevant data are being used. But thank you for that. I just need to move on to another presenter just to make sure everyone's got time. But thanks for that background. That was very useful. Okay, so there's. I just want to make sure that we allow everyone to say what I want to say. So there was so Mrinal is not here. We had some inputs from a professional med chemist in India, Mrinal, but he said he was in another meeting, so he might not be able to join us. So I think we'll just skip that. But he did send us some suggestions as to what to make next. These are shown on the deck if anyone wants to have a look at those, and they're on the blog. These are composite structures based on quite similar to known actives. So not drastic changes to the structure, but sort of composites of what is seen to be attractive fragments. So I'd encourage everyone to have a look at those and have a look at some of Mrinal's justifications for that. One last thing, which I just stuck in at the last minute, I was talking to a guy called Chris Burns, who is a chemical biologist from Weehai, who was here the other day giving a talk, and he was looking at some of our structures, and he said, one isoster of an amide you might want to think about is this interesting trifluoromethylamine, alpha trifluoromethylamine, as an isoster. I hadn't seen that before, but it looks quite interesting. He's going to send me some details of stuff that they've done with this replacement. He says that this is a one-step synthesis from the relevant imine. So if that's the case, that we could easily generate compounds of this kind. It would be interesting electronically if that's an isoster of an amide. Is interesting because that shouldn't be quite so electron withdrawing as the amide was. So we might be able to sort of retain some of the electronic structure of the amide without the electron deficient nature of the aromatic ring, the pyrazine ring, which was thought to be a liability for the aldehyde oxidase. So that's something which could be thought of next if we could find a chemist interested in doing that. All right, so there's just some. Hopefully, people have got a little bit of time just to stick around for some background to data management. I just wanted to give the floor to Chris Swain, who has been instrumental in drastically improving the way in which we are managing the data in the project. So the way in which we've got a Google Sheet working for the project. Chris, I've enabled you as a presenter. If you want to enable your microphone, you should be able to speak to us.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. That's great. Just run back to the deck. So yes, I can. If you'd like to say a little bit about what you've been doing, that would be really interesting.
Okay, I'll go through this pretty quickly because I think the slides are pretty self-explanatory. The background is that historically the data has been spread over multiple web pages. This does mean that everybody can find the data, but actually it's a pretty challenging exercise to do that. The other thing is that depending on the assay, you have multiple compound identifiers, multiple data sources, and so actually linking everything together was quite a difficult exercise. So if you go on to the next slide. So the Google spreadsheet is intended as the simplest way of doing things, and one of the things it's been very successful in doing is encouraging people to enter data. And we've now had a lot of people putting in a lot of data, and I have to extend a huge thanks to all the people that have done that. The link there gives you a link to the actual Google spreadsheet so you can have a look at it. And when I looked, I think it was on Friday night, there were 265 compounds there and 46 columns of data. You can download this data as a tab delimited file using the link that's shown there. And the question now is, how can we best leverage this data? So if you go on to the next slide. A huge thanks to Luke here, who's provided a web-based view of all the information. There's a link there. You just click on that, and what it does is actually downloads all the data from the live Google spreadsheets, calculates a whole variety of physical chemical properties on the fly, and then displays it as a table and a variety of different plots. If you go on to the next slide. This just gives you a snapshot of one of the views. So you've got there a table, and you can search and sort on that table, and there's a radar plot at the bottom there. There's options to add a whole variety of different other plots, and it's really just a question of the group deciding what they think is the most preferable. If you go on to the next slide. So Vortex is a tool that I use quite extensively. It's a very high performance data visualization and analysis platform. What I've done is I've written a script in Python. You can download it from the link there. If you go on to the next slide, that just shows you the Python script, but also gives you a view of what the data looks like once it's into the application. Vortex, of course, is a commercial application, and I appreciate that there may be people who want to use open source alternatives. So if you go on to the next slide. I've written an IPython notebook, so this is anybody who has Python installed on their machine can use this. The link there gives you a link to the actual notebook, and you can download that and use it as you wish. If you go on to the next slide. This just shows you an example of using the notebook. You can import the data, then use RDKit, which is an open source cheminformatics toolkit, to calculate a variety of properties. And all I've done there is just show the commands to display a particular structure, or then at the bottom just create a simple histogram of the data that's in the table. Again, these applications pull the data directly from the Google spreadsheet, so they're using live, up-to-date information. So now you've got 3 or 4 different ways of accessing the information, and I guess it's really up to all the people to actually now use that information and start building predictive models. Okay, that's it.
That's fantastic, Chris. Thanks so much. It's made a big difference. Because lots of people can now enter data into the project, and we can now use the data for a number of different things, which is really sensational. We did have a way of doing this right at the start of the project, but rapidly this Google spreadsheet, which contained picture files, became unusable. This combination is very powerful, of having data and then being able to extract live data into a web page. One last comment from Chris Southan. It would be very useful to hear what you had to say about the slide you forwarded, Chris, about the way in which the data is behaving online. Would you be able to just say a couple of words about the slide you forwarded, Chris? I'll bring it up now. Hi, Chris. assume.
I don't think you've got Chris Southern microphone on.
Oh yeah, so I have. He's a presenter, but Chris, you've got to switch your microphone on the top of the screen. The little grey icon needs to go green. Anything? Any luck, Chris, or no? May have to just quickly skip on to the...
Am I coming through?
Yes, you are.
Right.
I'm finding it very difficult to hear you, Chris. I'm not quite sure. So other people can hear him, but I can't.
Oh, okay. So you can hear me, Chris, yeah?
Yeah.
It's just...
Yep.
Right, okay. So, yeah, I just essentially... an extension from the Sterling stuff that Chris has been doing. Basically, I think it's very useful for us to map what we're doing into PubChem. Essentially, the project's already been doing that when they submitted directly to Chemball, because within the release phase of Chemball, that data comes through into PubChem. Basically, from an older sheet, you can see from the 250 inches I got from that master sheet, 167 were in PubChem, the rest of them were not. So, and as expected, 155 of those had a Chemball match, exact match. So just going forward, there's a few things about the sheet, a couple of inchy keys missing. There's the usual round tripping issues between smiles and inches. If you run them through Chemicalize, they'll occasionally split the renderings. But that's we live with that. And I suggest we think about submitting summary data directly as a PubChem bioassay, and we should think about refreshing the data. Think about whether, for example, if newer assays can displace the older assay data, even though obviously in situ you archive all your data. I think it's worth depositing the rest of the structures into PubChem, even the ones that you're designing, because then as long as they're labeled as virtuals, that's fine. And of course, then everything's globally findable by anybody with a similarity search. You don't need exact match. And just iterate what Chris says. There's a lot of synonyms floating around. Okay, there's at least 4 or 5 that we're dealing with in the project, and you really have to be careful to lock these down, or you get into all sorts of spaghetti. And remember, if some of these surface and they're incorrect, they'll go around the world and you can't get them back. So I think that's it. Unless there's any questions.
Great, thank you, Chris. If you could just mute your microphone, Chris, that'd be very useful. Chris Swain, did you want to say something there? You have to enable your microphone.
I suspect that many of the people watching this are not particularly excited by all this data management, and I just wonder whether we should have a smaller meeting to discuss some of the details, because I have a few concerns about the spreadsheet and how we're going to maintain it in the future.
Yes, I agree absolutely. I wanted to feature what you've been doing just because it's such great work, but I agree that I think we should have a focus meeting on informatics pretty soon. I'll be in Europe in September, and maybe the time zone will be easier if we could arrange something then. So yes, I agree. Let's postpone it until a focus meeting. But thank you very much for all that stuff. That was very useful. So last thing, just to wrap up, we need to come up with a list of what to make next, and that's the ultimate point of this exercise. Given that we're at 5 o'clock, and we don't have very much more time, I guess the one thing that I think I'm going to have to do is to summarize some of the discussion we've had today, send around this deck. We should here come up with a list of a few compounds that we think need to be made, send those around to everybody for comment, and iteratively come up with the next round of compounds to make. And I'd like to do that in the course of the next 1 or 2 weeks, to make sure we have a complete list of next targets that we can send around the community. That's going to have to be the basic idea. I don't think we're going to have time to do that today. I just wanted to pass the floor back to you, Paul, if you had anything that you wanted to say as a top priority as a response to some of these discussions. Your microphone's muted.
No, I think it's been a great discussion, Dan. There's some really good threads. I think the onus is now on us as a project to make sure we maintain the momentum that we've started this morning with some great suggestions, and really drive those forwards outside of the meeting to get some new targets agreed and prioritized. I think perhaps going forwards, as the project's getting bigger, I think what we've seen this morning, that perhaps, an hour is not long enough for the meeting, so we perhaps even need to, as Swain suggested, split into separate subtopics where meetings can be discussed, or perhaps in some cases have a little bit longer, so we could take advantage of getting everyone together and really discussing things through in the future. Yeah. Okay. Good. That's great. Okay. Well, all the materials that we've had today are obviously available on the agenda item that was on GitHub. If you can't find something in this project, please just send me a message and I can point you in the right direction. But stay tuned, and we'll come up with a list of compounds that we think are going to be good, and we'll go through an iterative process of refining those so that we can start making the best compounds we can based on the data we have so far. If anybody was unable to talk or present something they wanted to talk about today, then please again just let me know. And yeah, as people have suggested, we can have more focused meetings, no problem at all. So that just means I think I just need to have to thank people for turning up. If someone, Alice, if you could make sure that the chat window is captured, we'll post that alongside the recording of this meeting to make sure that that we captured everything. Thank you, Alice. Okay, thank you everyone for turning up. Hugely appreciated your suggestions, and I'll be in touch as soon as I'm able with outcomes from the meeting and suggested ways forward. Thank you, everybody, and have a good evening or morning, depending on where you are.
Thank you.